Hello everybody, and welcome back to Great Woman History. Today I'll be discussing Catherine De Medici. Catherine was a member of the Medici family. For those who don't know, the Medici were a powerful banking family in Florence who dominated Florentine politics for a century before becoming outright rulers in 1532. Catherine was born on April 13, 1519. Her father was Lorenzo de Medici, Duke of Urbino. Not the cool Lorenzo de Medici, a different one. Her mother was Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne. While her parents were said to have been excited about her birth, the three would not have a happy life together. When Catherine was only a few weeks old, her mother died of either puerperal fever or plague, and her father died of syphilis. Some speculate that both of Catherine's parents died of syphilis. After the death of her parents, Catherine was raised by her paternal grandmother, Alfonsina Orsini. Unfortunately, by this time Alfonsina was in very poor health and died in 1520, when Catherine was still an infant. The baby was then sent to live with her father's sister, Clarice de Medici. While this arrangement lasted a few years longer than the previous one, that's not saying a whole lot. In 1527, the Medici family was overthrown in Florence, and Catherine was sent into a convent. The following year, her aunt and former guardian, Clarice, died. Catherine would initially stay in various convents, and spent 3 years in the Santissima Annunziata della Mirate. Then in 1530, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V captured Florence, and the Medici family was reinstated. After this, Pope Clement VII, who happened to be a Medici himself, summoned Catherine to Rome. In 1533, Francis I of France offered his son Henry, the Duc d'Orléans, as a husband for Catherine. Clement agreed. The Medici family at this point were rich, but they were not truly prestigious. A marriage to the second son of the French king was a big deal. On October 28, 1533, when they were both 14, Henry and Catherine were married. The marriage would not be without its problems. In 1534, Clement died, and the next pope, Paul III, refused to pay the dowry that Clement had promised. Henry took many mistresses, and in the first year of their marriage, the couple hardly saw each other. One of Henry's mistresses, Diane de Poitiers, was 20 years his senior. She would have a hold on Henry's heart for his entire life. In 1536, Henry became the Dauphin of France after his older brother died. At this point, Henry and Catherine had been married for 3 years, and there was no child. In 1537, one of Henry's mistresses, Philippa Ducci, gave birth to a daughter. The child showed that Henry was capable of fathering children. Henry's confirmed virility, combined with his new position as heir to the throne, increased pressure for a legitimate child. A divorce from Catherine was considered due to her perceived infertility. Diane de Poitiers started pressuring Henry to visit his wife's bed more frequently. Catherine would resort to disgusting purported methods that are known today to be ineffective, such as drinking mule's urine and placing cow dung on her vagina. She also sought the advice of Jean Fresnel, a prominent French physician. Then in 1544, Catherine finally gave birth to a son named Francis. Catherine and Henry would then have 9 more children. Out of their 10 children, 7 would survive to adulthood. Maybe the cow dung worked after all. Or, maybe Catherine never was infertile and Henry just stopped neglecting his duties. Who's to say? I am. It's the latter. It's not the cow dung. In 1547, Francis I died, and Henry became Henry II of France. As a result, Catherine became Queen Consort of France. 2 years later, she would officially be crowned queen. Just for a quick recap on the death count, Catherine's mother, father, grandmother, aunt, distant cousin, brother-in-law, and now father-in-law have died so far. Also during the reign of Henry II, 3 of their children would die in infancy, so let's add them too. During Catherine's time as Queen Consort, the then 5-year-old Mary, Queen of Scots, would be betrothed to Catherine's oldest son Francis, and Mary would live at the French court alongside the royal children. Also during this time, in 1559 to be more specific, the Peace of Cateau-Cambrésis was signed, which ended the Italian Wars. I would go into detail about them, but this is already shaping up to be a longer video than some, if not all, of the previous ones, and Catherine's hardly done anything yet. Well, except the cow dung thing. One important aspect of the Peace of Cateau-Cambrésis is that it led to the betrothal of Catherine's daughter Elizabeth to Philip II of Spain. On June 30th, 1559, there was a tournament to celebrate the proxy marriage of Elizabeth of Valois to Philip II of Spain. A proxy marriage is a marriage ceremony where one or more parties is unable to attend. In this case, Philip was still in Spain, so the Duke of Alba stood as his proxy. There would be another ceremony in Guadalajara upon her arrival in Spain. The tournament itself is what's important to Catherine's story. Henry II competed in the jousting, and being the loving husband that he was, wore the colors of his favorite mistress. During the jousting, he rode against Gabriel, Comte de Montgomery. Montgomery's lance shattered when it hit Henry's face, and a fragment of it injured Henry's eye. 10 days later, on July 10, 1559, Henry II of France died. And now for a brief detour to discuss Nostradamus. Catherine De Medici has been linked to the occult because of her association with characters such as Nostradamus. Nostradamus published his famous quatrains in a book titled Les Prophéties. After reading the book in 1555, Catherine thought some of the quatrains hinted at threats to the royal family and summoned Nostradamus to court. Nostradamus would eventually be counselor and physician in ordinary to Charles IX of France, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So now let's discuss the reign of Catherine's eldest son, Francis II. In 1558, Francis married Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary was declared Queen of Scotland when she was only 9 months old, after the death of her father, James V. Francis was 14 at the time of their marriage. Mary's mother was a member of the Guise family of France, and Mary's maternal uncles were prominent members of Francis's court. The Guise family was not popular in France, and even less so in Scotland. In 1560, after some time of Scottish lords rebelling and the English navy blockading Scottish ports, Francis II had no choice but to pull French troops out of Scotland and to stop flaunting his wife's claim to England. The influence of the Guise family in France resulted in the Amboise conspiracy, an attempted overthrow of the French government against the Guise brothers in order to have Protestantism officially recognized. The leaders of the Amboise conspiracy were from the Bourbon family of Navarre and had a claim to the throne of France should all of Catherine's sons die without male heirs. That'll be important later. The Amboise conspiracy was unsuccessful and led to Francis II persecuting Protestants. In late 1560, Francis grew ill, likely from an abscess in his ear. He had no sons from his marriage to Mary, Queen of Scots. He was only 16, so it's not really surprising. Francis's younger brother Charles was still a child and would need a regent. Since the closest adult male relative would be Antoine de Bourbon, King of Navarre, a conspirator in the Amboise conspiracy, Catherine acted quickly. She offered to release Antoine's brother, who was captured during the conspiracy, in exchange for Antoine renouncing claims to the regency of France. On December 5, 1560, Francis II died. The 9-year-old Charles became King Charles IX of France, and Catherine was appointed to the regency by the Privy Council. The age of Catherine de Medici had officially begun. Catherine was born into the Medici family. As such, one cannot talk about Catherine without talking about her patronage of the arts. She commissioned the building of Tuileries Palace and Hôtel de la Reine, both of which are in Paris. Those of you who are familiar with the French Revolution may remember that Tuileries Palace was the meeting place of the Constituent Assembly, the National Convention, and the ironically named Committee of Public Safety. Of course, those events would happen several centuries later. Catherine collected many paintings as well. She commissioned musical shows to entertain the court. One show that developed was Ballet Comique de la Reine. It is considered to be the first ballet. Okay, so enough of the arts. I know you guys clicked on this video to hear about all the bloodshed. So, let's get on to the French Wars of Religion. During the first 2 years of Charles IX's reign, Catherine tried to keep the peace in France between the Catholics and the Huguenots. This was much easier said than done. At the Colloquy of Poissy, she summoned Catholic and Protestant church leaders to debate and discuss doctrine. The two sides were both so unwilling to compromise that they ended the meeting without her permission. Catherine later issued the Edict of Saint-Germain in an attempt to make France more tolerant of Protestants. Unfortunately, Catherine did not have the unanimous support of her nobles with regards to this issue. In 1562, the Duke of Guise, yeah, that guy's back. Fun. Led his men in attacking Huguenots who were worshipping in a barn in Vassy. The Massacre of Vassy is so named because 74 people were slaughtered and 104 were wounded. Despite Catherine's best attempts, there would not be peace. The French Wars of Religion took place intermittently from 1562 to 1599. 3 million people would die in the 36-year period from violence as well as famine and disease that war brings with it. One of the most gruesome events of the French Wars of Religion, and the event that made Catherine de Medici infamous, is the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Isn't it great how every event in this war has massacre in the title? On August 18, 1572, Catherine's daughter Margaret married Henry III of Navarre. Because Henry was himself a Huguenot and a king in his own right, there were many wealthy Protestants in Paris for their wedding. On August 22nd, an attempt was made on the life of Admiral de Coligny. a leading Huguenot in Charles IX's court. It is unknown who planned the attack. It was likely the Guise family, since the shot came from a Guise house. The Duke of Alba is another possibility, since he and Coligny quarreled over the Netherlands. Many people blame Catherine de Medici, though, and believe she planned the attack as the first step in the upcoming massacre. After the assassination attempt, Catherine and her son were worried about the possibility of Protestants still in Paris seeking revenge. They acted quickly, as Catherine always does. The city gates were shut. The Swiss Guard was given a kill list consisting of leading Protestants. Parisian citizens were armed. First, the Huguenot nobles were kicked out of the Louvre and killed in the street. Then the people of Paris killed their Protestant neighbors, including women and children. The massacre lasted 3 days. Only Henry of Navarre and his cousin, the Prince of Condé, were spared, and that was only because both promised to convert. The massacre spread from Paris to the other provinces of France. Jules Michelet wrote that St. Bartholomew's was not a day, but a season. The killings in the provinces lasted until October. On the low end, the death toll is 2,000 in Paris and 3,000 in the provinces. On the high end, it's 20,000 total. In 1574, Charles IX died at the age of 23. Since his only son was illegitimate and his daughter was barred from inheriting the throne, France followed Salic law. Charles's brother Henry became Henry III of France. Henry was not in France at the time since he had been elected King of Poland-Lithuania the year before. Before Charles died, he named Catherine regent on his brother's behalf for this very reason. Henry hurried home, and Catherine became an advisor to her son. She frequently traveled the country in an attempt to keep the peace. Despite marrying in 1575, Henry had no children, so his younger brother Francis was heir presumptive. Francis liked the chaos of the religious wars and frequently stirred the pot, much to the chagrin of his mother. In 1584, Francis died, and there was now a succession crisis. Henry III still had no sons. Henry III was the only remaining son Catherine had. Since France followed Salic law, the throne would not pass to any of Catherine's daughters or their children. Instead, the throne would pass to a male cousin of Henry III. This cousin was Henry III of Navarre. This is the same King Henry of Navarre who married Margaret of Valois in 1572 and converted to Catholicism to avoid being killed in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Upon his return to Navarre, he renounced his conversion. Many in France did not wish to see a Huguenot on the French throne. And considering what they did to the Huguenots not that long before, yeah, it's understandable why they might be hesitant to have one in charge of them. Possible repercussions and the like. Henry, Duke of Guise, became the head of the Catholic League, and he started advocating for Cardinal Charles de Bourbon to be the heir instead. Henry III fought many times against the Catholic League. However, it was impossible to fight a war against the Catholic League and the Huguenots residing in France. After months of Henry III having to give in to the many demands of the League, Henry decided to do a less than diplomatic move. Catherine would never have approved of his plan, though, so he dismissed all of his advisors, including her. On December 23, 1588, he had his personal bodyguard assassinate the Duke of Guise. 8 other members of the Guise family were also assassinated at this time. Catherine died on January 5, 1589. Many believed that the actions of her son 2 weeks prior shortened her life. She likely died of pleurisy. She was initially buried at Blois, before being buried in the Saint-Denis Basilica in Paris. In 1793, the bones of the kings and queens of France, including Catherine, were tossed into a mass grave. Henry III was assassinated only a few months after Catherine's death, and Henry of Navarre became Henry IV of France. Many today see Catherine de Medici as a conniving and power-hungry woman, an evil woman. This reputation is largely derived from her ties to Nostradamus, as well as her involvement in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. There is a large extent to which Catherine did what was necessary in order to keep her sons on the throne. Henry IV later said of her, "I ask you, what could a woman do, left by the death of her husband with 5 little children on her arms, and 2 families of France who were thinking of grasping the crown, our own and the Guises? Was she not compelled to play the strange parts to deceive first one and then the other, in order to guard as she did her sons, who successively reigned through the wise conduct of that shrewd woman? I am surprised that she never did worse." And now, just for fun, let's see the death counter. So there was her father, her mother, her grandmother, her aunt, her cousin the Pope, her brother-in-law, her father-in-law, 3 children in the cradle, her husband, her first son, Nostradamus, her second son, 3 million French people, her fourth son, and also her daughter Elizabeth and her daughter-in-law Mary Queen of Scots, who she also outlived. That brings our total to 3,017,000, and that concludes the 5th episode of Great Woman History. Come back next time to learn about Hatshepsut. If you enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe. If there is any particular woman that you would like for me to do an episode on, then please mention her in the comments below. Thank you.